Up next, we have a special guest. Of course, we're taking you here from Denver virtually, and we've got Russell Castagnaro of the Colorado Governor's Office here to talk to us a little bit about digital identity as well. This guy has been endeavoring in the space for some time and is going to come to us with some, well, pretty fascinating disclosures today too. Russell, I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks a lot, David. I appreciate it. And boy, to follow two talks like that was pretty awesome. Let me, I think I forgot to share my screen. That always helps first, doesn't it? Let me do that here. Okay, so now we should be all good to go. I do want to say that my talk should be a little more fun, and although there's some good stuff, really the gist of it is I want everyone to understand who's watching this how important digital identity is for enabling what is to come, and how we're at the beginning of this amazing thing, and it all comes down to identity. So so I'm talking about how digital identity is the on-ramp to the new information superhighway. And I think I should, as a disclaimer, point out that there are a lot of anachronistic concepts in this presentation. It's all intentional. And if nothing else, you'll get out of this with a history lesson that might help you if you're somehow trapped in the world of Ready Player One. But information superhighway and infobond, it's what we used to call back in the 90s, most notably Al Gore used to call the internet. And it's a nice metaphor, so I'm going to use it to a kind of an embarrassing extent today. I also want to point out that most of my slides on the upper left-hand corner have a QR code. So if you are a Colorado ID holder or driver's license holder and you have My Colorado, you can scan that and see how our digital sharing works already. If you don't have it yet, but you do have one of those IDs, it takes about 90 seconds to sign up. So I talk a lot, so you won't miss that much if you wanted to try it. So before the internet, this is what getting online looked like. This was a dial-up connection to a bulletin board system, or a BBS. And they had these menu-driven things that were all over Telnet. And the way that we got into the internet, or to online, not really the internet yet, was these kinds of these modems that were just crazy. And I can tell you this firsthand because at my high school, we had an HP 9000, and you could check out a suitcase-sized modem and terminal so you could bring it home and dial it in. And of course, I discovered that you could use the same hardware to call into the other BBSs and even the local credit union or bank, because they pretty typically and conveniently left the phone number, username, and password on the terminals when my mom would go to the bank. So I would just walk over and got really good at memorizing those things. And I could dial in and do all sorts of fun stuff. And now I'd go to jail for that. But back then it was just good, clean fun. Kind of like playing with knives in Australia in the first Crocodile Dundee movie. That's another anachronism for you guys. There were some bigger systems like the Source and CompuServe that gave a more curated service. And then something really weird happened, right? Hopefully you can hear this. Imagine that on the DJ chill section. But anyway, it was this excruciating process to connect to the internet because of these phone lines that we had to deal with. And but of course, AOL, they gave you a free 5 1/4 inch floppy. It was delivered to your door. It was a curated email, had a cool movie that was made about it. So people started using it like crazy. And that was great, and that really got us started. Now, something that Andreas Antonopoulos likes to remind us is that new infrastructure most often supports old models as well as new ones. So in this picture, you see a horse and buggy operating on a highway. So roads are actually better, paved roads are actually better for horses and buggies. They can travel more quickly and stuff. So so we use these 300, 600, 1200 baud modems on what was then the beginnings of the internet, and it supported us just fine as it grew and we grew. So we, even though we're using not the most optimal way to get in, which back then was probably like a T1, we could still do it. But we have come a long way, baby. And so Gigabit Ethernet or Gigabit Internet is a reality in some places. In fact, in the United States, Chattanooga, Tennessee, my hometown, was the first gig city where the gas utility installed fiber and gave everybody gigabit internet. Of course, that was after I left. But frustrating, this is not ubiquitous. We're getting there. Most places have between 1 meg and 10 megabit internet access, which is not, which is a hell of a lot better than it used to be, but not quite enough for us to do everything we want to do. But there's no freaky dial tones necessary. And as more of us are accessing the internet at faster and faster speeds, and applications grow and everything, what was once impossible or seemed impossible in 5 years became a reality. So we said goodbye to Blockbuster, to MCI, gaming arcades in malls, Toys R Us, Borders bookstore, flea markets, and of course, the old standby long distance calling cards. And so I think you've seen from this example, and it's something that we all know, right? How important it is to get access to the infrastructure of the internet. And this led to our whole economy, the new economy based on the internet, industry and business. The key is that this applies to blockchain as well. So if we back up a little bit and look at things, something like paper wallets, I think we can all agree that paper wallets are super cool and awesome for crypto. They're kind of limited. And another disclaimer here, you'll note that this is a public and private key, and if you're smart little hackers like many of you are, you'll already have tried to clear these wallets and have discovered a little bonus I sent in there for you. So it'll be interesting to see who did that. Paper wallets don't travel well. Water isn't so good for them. It's easy to steal. You take a picture of it, suddenly you've been thwarted. So I wonder how many of you did, and you can tell in the comments. Paper wallets did improve. They got a lot better. In fact, with WamPay, my company that I had, I used to hand out free paper wallets just to get people up to date and let them know how to actually use them. And the one thing out of all this, though, that continues to really be limiting us is identity, right? And I look back when I was in Hawaii, we were evaluating doing a blockchain-based land title system. I know, it's kind of crazy, right? And the problem is to implement that system, everything needed to be what they call a type 2 document. A type 2 document is one that's generated electronically, but it needs to be called papered out, like printed and signed and then scanned back in. And the reason is that they didn't have any way to authenticate someone's identity completely electronically, right? So it would have been actually wasted effort to go through all this to do electronically from the standpoint of the registrars, understand? Not from me, I would have loved it. But so it had to be signed and then recorded. It was crazy. And it should have told me a lesson at that point, but I was so excited about the technology anyway, that I didn't learn my lesson. I got into the blockchain business after that with WamPay. And the whole idea was you could do custody-less and exchange-less payments with Bitcoin at the time. And I tried to do that for a while, and it's limited. You can do a limited number of things, but I realized that what we really are missing was identity. And without identity, there's only so much this technology will allow us to do. I think this is probably going to be a really familiar image to many of you. The error message may not be, but it all looks the same. This is the Coinbase error that says they couldn't scan your image from your driver's license. It's also the same page that they display if there's some other sort of problem when they onboard you. Exchanges, crypto exchanges, they spend a whole lot of money for KYC and AML, know your customer, and anti-money laundering compliance. Sometimes there's 2 to 3 weeks waiting when it's a really busy trading time. I don't know what it is now. But it must be crazy to get onboarded to like Uphold and all these other ones. But it is excruciating, and I can tell you that myself, I still can't get a GDAX account because I was a Hawaii resident, and Hawaii residents and crypto exchanges are like oil and water for some reason. Anyway, I also remember signing up for an Estonian digital ID when that first came out. It first became available, and I went online, paid my $100, then got an email I got an email from them requesting me to reply to the email with a picture of my passport and driver's license. I lost that $100, and I do not have a digital ID because I did not send them my information via email. So let me just say it right now. Digital identity is not your access card or your Stoyer loyalty program in a phone-based wallet. I'm not talking about presenting a physical version of an ID when I talk about a real digital ID. And I'm also not talking about pictures of the front and back of an ID. That's just dumb for purposes of really confirming identity. So that's not it. A lot of you may be familiar with this kind of a scheme where they ask you to hold up your credit card or driver's license or some other documents next to your face, scanning both you and the document. And they look at that to make sure that you are who you say you are. There's loads and loads of websites that do that. Interestingly, this picture is not taken from one of those sites. This picture is taken from a scam site, one of many that are out there, where you can download a template of any state or country's driver's license, put your photo in so you can get through this kind of security all the time. So that physical document there is, in the real world, a measure of security. It's got security features. When you take a picture of it and use that, it becomes a weakness. And in my Colorado, we experienced this ourselves. It's very embarrassing to me, I have to admit, but when we first set this up in September 2019, we used to have all these steps to be able to on-ramp someone to have their digital identity. We scan the front and the back of the driver's license and a snapshot of your face. Now, the standard approach here is you compare the person's face to the picture on their driver's license and the information that's on there with the barcode. Well, big surprise, that's really, really easy to fake and really, really difficult to detect fraud. And there's a lot of money that you can spend per transaction on getting that kind of security on there, but it's always fallible. So we learned a lot about how to do facial recognition and facial comparison with documents. We removed that, so that's no longer part of my Colorado. Because we would much rather depend on the selfie and comparing that to the document that is actually stored at the DMV than going the other route. And, I know I'm talking to a blockchain group of folks, and I'm really happy. And everybody really thinks we want to be at a place where sovereign identity is what's really acceptable. I think we all do. I mean, Sir Isaac's last talk was totally awesome about that. But what we have to remember is people have to be comfortable with a digital ID first before we can even broach the subject of sovereign identity being acceptable in a really big scale way. And that's really the focus of my Colorado and Colorado Digital ID since we launched in October of 2019. So we spent the better part of a year socializing the concept of accepting digital ID. And this was in the real world, right? IRL. This is for going up and buying liquor at a liquor store, going into a cannabis dispensary, talking to a police officer. We had to make sure that agencies, that merchants, people, law enforcement, all knew it was okay to accept digital ID before it could broadly be accepted. And so that took a whole lot of work. So for a year, you could pop out your My Colorado app and show your real-time updated Colorado digital ID with all the cool security features. But a digital ID, if you're looking at it with your eyes, can be faked, just like a physical ID can be faked. But people started getting it intellectually, and we have over 500 businesses that are accepting it as their preferred method. There's many more that are accepting it that haven't said it's their preferred. And that includes a whole lot of cannabis dispensaries and liquor stores. In November, we added the electronic sharing of identity attributes, and you have to grant those attribute that sharing by the holder. And so it got really interesting starting in November.
Hi, I'm Officer Elder, Broomfield Police Department. The reason I pulled you over is you're going too fast. Do you have your driver's license, registration, and insurance with you?
Yeah, do you accept the digital ID?
Yes.
Okay.
Basically what happened here was the police stopped the driver. She said, "Oh, I've got digital ID. Can you accept that?" And he said yes. And so she scanned the QR code from the police officer. That opened up a dialogue to ask to share the information. And you can see here that she could choose the information that she wanted to share, or she could just not do it and give the regular ID to it. But this concept of having required information to share and then optional information to share is something that we built into My Colorado so we could do that. So let's look at the rest. So she goes ahead and confirms all this. The interwebs are invoked, and then the police officer goes back to his vehicle, and he can see everything on his screen. So what's important about this, right, is that, you know, I realize I'm showing a video of digital ID being shared to law enforcement in a super libertarian leading event, right? And it's a lot easier to do when I'm not in front of all of you. So I get that. But here's the thing that you have to understand is that the ability to selectively share attributes can now be done electronically and directly with the entity that is requesting it. And that's what digital ID will allow. It gives you, this isn't really sovereign identity, but it gives the user a lot more control over things. And it's true that we implemented this using what's called the MDL standard, the mobile driver's license standard. So we act as the verifying entity for all this information. We're getting the request, pulling it from the DMV, and sending it to the police officer's client, right? So that's happening. But once this sort of behavior becomes normalized, of this electronic sharing of information, there's zero doubt of anyone that blockchain tech is going to be the fastest, safest, easiest way to share the information. And you know, I like to explain to people, if nothing else, you can think of the blockchain as a secure content delivery network for private information, for the ability to confirm that the information that you have is actually authentic. Our approach is really that sort of 56K modem equivalent of the information superhighway. But all of you, as developers here, you're the ones who are going to make the difference and be able to deploy these new technologies. This is going to nearly eliminate our dependence on third parties to facilitate information exchange. And you know, if you have to ask the question, have you been pwned? You sure as hell have. Your ass has been pwned many, many times. And this is because all these different companies are holding and sharing your data and act as intermediaries and data aggregators. Being able to hold your own identity, share things, and authenticate in an independent way without these third parties is what will enable us to take back information and to really lend a lot more security, to take Facebook and LexisNexis and Google and LinkedIn and you name it out of the picture, because there are better, cheaper, safer ways to get that information directly. And a whole lot less fraud. Remember one of those sites I told you about? This is a screen grab from one of those sites. You can go and download a template from any of those states that you want. Credit card fraud and payment fraud costs us over $20 billion in the United States alone. As we add more and more to it, adding an identity layer to that makes all the difference. So let's get really quick into these applications for digital statehood, because I think I'm pretty close to my time. Law enforcement is what you've already seen, that use case where we're sharing information. Another one is proof of age. right? And police, I mean, the bouncers and liquor stores, they don't need to prove that they've checked it, but if they do, they can lower their insurance a lot. So there's an incentive there for them. Digital consent is handled poorly across the board in many industries. We can provide a revocable digital consent where you can agree to participate in the program and then revoke that participation electronically. Try doing that with a paper waiver. We'll actually be storing license information in My Colorado in late spring. The next step will be independent verification of those licenses and credentials on the blockchain. The same, you go to a business. This is one of our bounties, actually. You can actually show your customers that you actually care about them and don't want them to have to productize themselves and get more accurate information when you use something like direct sharing with a digital identity, like My Colorado. Transcripts and credentials from higher ed or training. That means no more fake Harvard grads on LinkedIn. I read that there are more Harvard grads on LinkedIn than there have been Harvard diplomas issued on the in the history of Harvard. Cannabis dispensaries, they have to actually prove that that they've actually checked your ID. And that means that they scan your ID and they put it up on Google Drive or Dropbox somewhere. Lots of horrible things can happen with that. We're going to give them a solution where they can do it. And also exchanges, insurance companies, financial companies will be able to do real-time KYC at extremely low cost.
Wow.
Messaging, the last thing, and I'll be all done, is TSA. Everybody talks about wanting to be able to board a plane. That is coming very soon. So in closing, thank you very much. Go out there and build the next new economy. And remember that digital identity plus blockchain equals a whole new world without Disney. Thanks.
Wow. Well, Russell, that was a fantastic presentation. I've got to tell you, that AOL loading screen brought, I think, many of us back. Although I will say some of the commenters were a little bit afraid of handing over identity to the police officers that way. One commenter quipped, I should say, I wonder if the police officer's identity was shared with that driver. It's good to know that a crypto native person is helping steer the ship over there in Colorado. Thanks so much for this presentation.
Thank you.